It started with a mistake. Or maybe it wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was something waiting for me. Something that had been waiting for a very long time. I don't remember why I decided to take that train. I don't even remember buying the ticket. I only remember standing at a station I had never seen before. The air was thick with fog, curling like smoke around broken lamps. A single bench stood crooked in the middle of the platform, its paint peeling and its wood damp with rot. There were no signs, no maps, no clocks. Just a name carved into the cracked stone wall. Midnight Line. The sound of wheels on tracks echoed in the distance long before I ever saw the train. A groan of rusted metal, a shriek of iron against iron. I wanted to leave, to walk away, but my legs didn't obey. It was as if the fog itself held me there, wrapping around my ankles, pinning me to that forgotten platform. Then the headlight appeared. At first, it was just a dim glow in the mist, but it grew brighter until a hulking black train slid into view. Its cars were long, its windows dark, reflecting only the faint flicker of the platform's dying lamps. When it screeched to a halt, I felt the ground tremble beneath me. The doors hissed open. No one stepped out, no one greeted me, but something inside whispered for me to enter. And so I did. The interior was nothing like I expected. Instead of modern seats and overhead lights, I found myself inside a corridor lined with crimson velvet curtains and flickering lanterns that swung with the train's movements. The floor creaked under my shoes. The air smelled of dust, old wood, and something metallic, like rust or blood. A man sat in the first booth I passed. He was old, his face pale and lined with cracks as if it were carved from wax. He wore a black suit that might have once been expensive, though now it was frayed at the cuffs. His eyes followed me without blinking. "First time riding the Midnight Line?" he asked, his voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. I froze. I guess so. I don't even know where it goes. The man's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. None of us do. Before I could reply, the train lurched forward with a violent jolt, throwing me against the wall. I stumbled, steadying myself on the brass railing. Through the window, I saw nothing but blackness, as if the train wasn't moving through land at all, but through a void. I turned back toward the old man, but he was gone. His seat was empty. My heart hammered in my chest. I told myself maybe he moved to another car when I wasn't looking, but I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard anything at all. I moved deeper into the train. Each car was different. One was filled with long wooden benches, all empty except for a single child sitting in the corner. She clutched a porcelain doll, its face cracked down the middle.
Her hair was tangled, her dress torn. When I passed, she lifted her head and stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes. "Do you know when we'll arrive?" I asked, my voice trembling. The girl tilted her head the same way a doll might when its neck joint loosens. Then, in a whisper too quiet for the train's noise, she said, "We never arrive." I didn't ask her anything else. The next car was darker. The lanterns here were nearly extinguished, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. At the far end, a woman in a black veil sat with her hands folded neatly on her lap. I couldn't see her face, only the pale skin of her fingers clutching a rosary that clicked softly with every sway of the train. She didn't speak. But when I tried to pass her, she lifted her head. Beneath the veil, two hollow sockets stared back at me. I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the wall. When I blinked, she was gone. The bench was empty. By now, my panic was rising. I wanted to leave, to step off at the next stop. But through every window, all I could see was mist. No towns, no roads, no lights, just endless fog. And then, for the first time, I heard the conductor. It wasn't a whistle. It wasn't an announcement. It was a voice crackling through an old intercom speaker above my head. Next stop, nowhere. The static hissed and the speaker went silent. I don't know how long I walked the train that night. Time didn't move normally there. Each car held something different, someone different. A woman muttering prayers in a language I didn't recognize. A man who sat at a table eating food that turned to ashes when I looked closer. An empty booth where the cushions were soaked with something wet and dark. But I kept moving, because if I stopped, if I let myself sit down, I felt I would never stand up again. And then, finally, I reached a door at the very end of the train. Unlike the others, this one was locked. Brass chains wrapped tightly across it, symbols etched into the wood. Something behind it scratched, slowly, patiently. It was waiting. That was the first night I boarded the midnight line. But it would not be the last. Because once you ride it, you never really leave.
When I woke, I was still on the train. That's what chilled me the most. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment, I was staring out the window, watching the fog writhe like living things pressing against the glass, and the next, my head had fallen against the cold seat. The lanterns had gone out, every single one of them. The car was in total darkness, except for a faint glow far down the corridor where the next door waited. My breath clouded in the air. It was freezing, as though the train had crossed into some endless winter. I stood, my legs trembling, and began walking. My footsteps echoed too loudly, as if the train were hollow, an empty shell moving through a void. Halfway down the car, I heard it,
a whisper. At first, I thought it came from behind me, but when I spun around, there was no one there. Then it came again, this time from the seat beside me. I whipped my head toward it, but the seat was empty. Empty, except for the doll. The same porcelain doll the little girl had held. Its cracked face stared up at me from the seat, though I hadn't seen her place it there. Its glassy eyes glittered in the faint glow. Its lips seemed parted, and then, in a voice softer than my own heartbeat, it said, "She's waiting." I dropped it. It shattered against the floor, shards scattering across the aisle. But the whisper didn't stop. Now it was all around me. I fled to the next car, slamming the door behind me. This one was different. Unlike the old wood and velvet of the earlier cars, this one looked new, almost modern. Fluorescent lights hummed above rows of plastic seats. The windows here were clearer, but they revealed nothing but swirling fog. At the very back, someone sat hunched over a notebook, scribbling furiously. His long hair fell into his face, his hand moving faster than seemed human. Page after page he filled with words I couldn't see. When he noticed me, he stopped. Slowly, his head lifted, and I realized something terrible. The man in the seat was me, or rather, some twisted, hollow version of me. His skin was gray, his eyes bloodshot and unblinking. He smiled, and when he did, blood seeped from the corners of his mouth. "You're late. They've been waiting for you." My throat tightened. Who's waiting?" He didn't answer. He just slid the notebook toward me. Its pages were covered in frantic handwriting, my handwriting. Every word was the same, repeated over and over. "Don't arrive. Don't arrive. Don't arrive." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. This can't be real." The other me leaned forward. His voice was a whisper now, but it carried the weight of command. "Stay on the train. Don't ever leave." Before I could move, the lights flickered. When they steadied again, he was gone. The seat was empty. The notebook lay closed, untouched. I didn't know how long I wandered after that. The train seemed endless. Car after car, each one stranger than the last. One was filled with mirrors, lining the walls and ceiling. But my reflection never matched my movements. Sometimes it didn't appear at all. Sometimes it smiled when I didn't. Another car was a dining hall. Long tables set with silverware and plates of food. Dozens of passengers sat there, motionless, their faces buried in their meals. But when I looked closer, the food was rotten. Meat crawling with maggots, bread covered in mold. And still, the passengers ate, jaws working in silence, eyes vacant. When I tried to touch one, his head snapped up, his eyes were sewn shut with black thread. I ran. At some point, I began to hear it, the scratching again. Always at the end of the car, behind some locked door, always patient, always waiting. But now it was louder, closer. I reached a particularly long corridor where the scratching became a pounding. The brass chains across the final door rattled violently, as though whatever was behind it was trying harder to break free. I pressed my ear to the wood. A voice hissed through the cracks. "Let me in, please. You've been expected." I stumbled back, shaking my head. The chains groaned, straining. I didn't want to know what would happen if they broke. That was when the intercom crackled again. The conductor's voice, this time clearer. Approaching destination. My heart froze. The word I had read 1,000 times in that notebook echoed in my mind. Don't arrive. But the train was slowing. Through the windows, I saw faint lights in the fog. A station was emerging, its lamps glowing sickly yellow, its platform crowded with shadowy figures standing perfectly still. The train screeched to a halt. The doors opened, and all at once, every passenger I had seen, the child, the veiled woman, the dining hall husks, rose from their seats and began moving toward the exit, not walking, not running, but drifting as though pulled by invisible strings. I wanted to stay seated, to pretend I wasn't part of this, but my body betrayed me. My legs carried me forward toward the open door, and as I stepped onto the platform, I realized something horrifying. The figures waiting there weren't strangers. They were people I knew. Family, friends, faces from my childhood, my old neighborhood, co-workers long dead. They stared at me with lifeless eyes, their mouths moving in unison. Welcome home.
The platform stretched endlessly in both directions. I stood frozen among the passengers as the fog rolled across the cracked cement, curling around the rusted signs and broken lamps. The station smelled of ash and wet earth, like something long buried had just been dug up. The figures waiting for me, the faces of people I knew and some I barely remembered, moved closer. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe. My mother's face was among them, pale, hollow-eyed, lips trembling. But I knew she had died 10 years ago. "Welcome home," they repeated, their voices blending into a single droning whisper. I stumbled back toward the train, but the doors slammed shut behind me with a thunderous clang. The engine wailed, steam hissing through the air, and then the train vanished. It simply dissolved into the fog, leaving me stranded on the platform. The silence that followed was unbearable. I began walking. The station seemed abandoned, rusted benches, shattered clocks frozen at midnight,
and a flickering sign that read only one word: Terminus. As I moved deeper, I noticed more of them, shadow passengers emerging from the mist. They watched me, always whispering in unison, words I could never quite catch until I did. They were chanting my name. Every step echoed like thunder in the hollow space. My pulse hammered. I kept searching for an exit, a staircase, anything that would lead me out of this nightmare. Finally, I saw it. A staircase descending into blackness, lit by a single candle at the top. With no other choice, I went down. The stairs twisted endlessly. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers became. My candle sputtered, threatening to die, and shadows danced on the walls, shadows of people who weren't there. At last, I reached the bottom. A massive iron door stood before me, chains wrapped around it, identical to the ones I'd seen rattling on the train. And from the other side came that sound, the scratching, slow, deliberate, patient. I turned to run, but the staircase behind me was gone. Only black stone walls surrounded me. I was trapped. The scratching grew frantic, the door groaned, and then a voice hissed from behind me. "You brought us here." I spun around. The shadow passengers were filling the chamber, their sewn-shut eyes bleeding through the threads, mouths opening far too wide. They pressed closer and closer. "You boarded willingly. You stayed through the ride. Now," their voices blended into a shriek, "you must open the door." I shook my head violently. "No, I won't. Whatever's behind there, it's not meant to be free." But the chains snapped. One by one, the links burst apart, falling to the stone floor with a deafening crash. The iron door creaked open, and from the crack spilled a light so black it devoured everything it touched. My candle died instantly. From the darkness within, something massive began to crawl out. Not a creature, not a human, something older, something that had been waiting for centuries. The passengers dropped to their knees, faces tilted toward it in worship. "Home," they whispered again. "He has returned home." Its shadow fell over me, taller than the chamber, stretching longer than the walls should allow. I couldn't look directly at it without my vision swimming, without my mind buckling under its weight. But then it spoke, not with a mouth, but inside my skull. "You arrived, just as you were meant to." I screamed, tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The black light consumed the chamber, consumed the shadows, consumed me. The last thing I saw was the iron door slamming shut again. And when I opened my eyes, I was back on the train. My seat was cold. The lantern swayed gently.
The fog pressed against the windows, and the intercom crackled overhead. Next stop is Terminus.
The train's steady rumble had become almost hypnotic, a lullaby of metal grinding against rusted tracks. The narrator's steps echoed heavily as he pushed open the door into Car 7. The moment the door creaked shut behind him, everything changed. Unlike the other cars, this one wasn't filled with whispering shadows or flickering lights. Instead, it was immaculate, eerily immaculate. The air was cleaner, sharper, as if scrubbed of the suffocating dust that plagued the other compartments. The seats were perfectly aligned, polished, untouched, as though someone still cared for appearances here. No torn fabric, no broken windows, no stains on the floorboards. It was wrong. Perfection in this place was wrong. The narrator's skin prickled as he realized he could hear nothing at all. No rails beneath, no rattle of the train. It was like this car existed outside the rhythm of the ride, sealed off from the chaos of the rest of the train. And then he saw him. A lone passenger sat at the far end of the car. The figure's presence was so still, so absolute, that the narrator hadn't noticed him at first. He was dressed in a suit so black it seemed to absorb the dim glow around him. The jacket was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished as though he had just stepped out of a funeral. His head was bowed, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low to obscure his face. Both hands clutched tightly around a silver pocket watch that gleamed unnaturally against the gloom. The narrator hesitated, his throat dry. Something about the passenger's silence was more oppressive than all the whispers of the other cars combined. He took a cautious step forward. The floor creaked, shattering the fragile stillness. That was when the man finally stirred. Slowly, he raised his head. The narrator's breath hitched. The man's face was pale, too pale, stretched unnaturally thin, the skin drawn tight over sharp cheekbones. His lips were gray, cracked, and when his eyes lifted, the sockets were so sunken it seemed they had been hollowed out. Yet something moved in them, like faint coals deep inside an abandoned fireplace. But louder than his gaze was the sound of the pocket watch. Tick, tick, tick. Each click was sharp, deliberate, echoing unnaturally in the silence of the immaculate car. It was no longer the rhythm of time. It was the rhythm of a heartbeat. "You're late," the man rasped finally. His voice was brittle, dry, like the tearing of parchment. The narrator froze, his lips parted, but no words came. When he finally managed to speak, his voice cracked. "Late? Late for what?" The man tilted his head slowly, as if studying the question, before replying in that same hollow rasp. "Your stop. Everyone has a stop, but not everyone remembers to get off."
The word sank into the narrator's mind like cold iron. A stop. What stop? He hadn't seen any stations, any lights, any signs of civilization outside the endless fog and void rushing past the windows. The man's thin lips twitched into something like a smile. It wasn't joy, it was hunger. You've missed it once already. Miss it again, and the train doesn't forgive. The narrator's chest tightened. He wanted to demand answers, but before he could speak, the train shuddered violently. The lights flickered out, plunging Car 7 into total darkness. In the pitch black, only the pocket watch continued to tick. Tick, tick, tick. When the lights flickered back on, the seat at the far end of the car was empty. The man was gone, but the pocket watch remained. Resting neatly on the seat cushion, its silver casing glowing faintly as if it had absorbed part of the man's presence. The narrator's hand trembled as he reached for it. The metal was freezing cold, and the instant his fingers closed around it, the ticking grew louder, deafening, filling the entire car. His vision swam, the immaculate walls bending, twisting as if the train itself was breathing. And under the relentless ticking, he thought he heard something else. A whisper. A single phrase carried within the beat of the watch. Not everyone remembers to get off. The narrator shoved the pocket watch into his pocket, his heart hammering. He didn't understand what it meant, but deep inside he knew taking it was both a mistake and a necessity. When he turned back towards the door, the car didn't look immaculate anymore. Dust was spreading across the seats. Shadows leaked from the corners, and as he pushed the door open to escape, he swore he saw figures watching him from the windows, reflected in the glass. Figures that weren't there before.
The train wailed as if in pain, a metallic shriek echoing through the night. The narrator pressed onward, passing through Car 7 and clutching the pocket watch left behind by the pale man in the black suit. Its relentless ticking rattled his nerves, each click a reminder that time was running out, though for what, he still didn't know. When he slid the door open to Car 8, he froze. This carriage was unlike any other he had seen so far. The walls were not metal or wood, but glass. Every surface reflected fragments of his own face, twisted and fractured like broken mirrors. The flickering lamps above bathed everything in a sickly amber glow, and in the seats, shadows of people sat perfectly still, so still they might as well have been statues. And then one of them moved. A woman in a long, tattered gown rose slowly from her seat. Her hair was black and wild, cascading down her shoulders in tangled waves. She moved with elegance,
though her body looked fragile, brittle, as though it might shatter like the glass walls around them. Her eyes glowed faintly, too faintly to be human. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally through the carriage, as if spoken from both near and far away at once. The narrator's throat went dry. Who are you?" The woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Once I was a passenger, like you. I boarded this train thinking it would take me home. But home," her gaze drifted toward the flickering lamps, and her lips curled into a twisted smile. "Home is not where this train goes." The narrator gripped the pocket watch tighter. "Then where does it go?" She stepped closer, her bare feet making no sound against the glass floor. As she approached, the shadows seated in the carriage turned their heads in unison, all of them now staring directly at him with hollow eyes. The woman leaned so close that her breath chilled his skin. "It goes where the living don't belong." The narrator staggered back, nearly colliding with one of the glass seats. The silent passengers, those shadowy figures frozen in place, shifted slightly, their bodies creaking like branches in a storm. Their faces were indistinct, blurred as if someone had wiped away their identities with trembling hands. "I don't belong here," he muttered. "I'm not supposed to be on this train." The woman's laugh was sharp and hollow, like glass cracking under pressure. "None of us were supposed to be here. That's the secret. Nobody buys a ticket willingly. The train finds you." Her words lodged in his chest like splinters. The train finds you. He remembered the station, the fog, the way the engine appeared from the mist as though summoned by something unseen. Had it been waiting for him all along? The woman glided to the center of the carriage. The lamps overhead dimmed, leaving the space in murky half-darkness. Then the shadows in the seats began to move. Their heads jerked, their limbs twitched, their hands flexed and clawed at the glass armrests. One by one, they rose, their eyeless faces reflecting the amber glow. The narrator's heart hammered. "Stay back!" But the woman only smiled wider. "You carry the watch. That means they'll follow you." He looked down at the pocket watch clutched in his hand. The ticking had grown louder, sharper, until it echoed against the glass walls. The shadows turned toward him, like predators drawn to the sound of prey. Suddenly, they lunged. The narrator sprinted down the narrow aisle as the shadows clawed at his arms and legs. Their touch burned, not like fire, but like cold so deep it stripped the warmth from his bones. He stumbled forward, barely keeping his balance until he reached the end of the carriage. The door was locked. Behind him, the woman watched calmly, her expression unreadable. The shadows shrieked, their voices 1,000 overlapping cries. He beat against the door, the pocket watch slipping in his sweaty hands. "Please!" he shouted.
The woman lifted a single hand, and the shadows froze mid-motion. Their bodies twitched, but they no longer advanced. She stepped closer once more, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "You want to leave?" she whispered. "Yes, please." Her hand touched the glass door beside him. Instantly, the reflections inside it shifted. Instead of his pale face, he saw another scene entirely. A dark forest, trees swaying violently in an unseen wind. A railway cutting through the woods. The train was there too, chugging slowly through the mist. But this was not the same train. This one was empty. "This is the other side," the woman said. Her voice had softened, almost gentle. "Every passenger dreams of leaving, but not everyone survives the crossing. If you go through, you may never wake up again." The narrator swallowed hard. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, distorted, wide-eyed, terrified. Behind him, the shadows hissed, twitching against invisible restraints. The watch in his hand ticked faster, its hands spinning out of control. The woman leaned closer, her lips nearly brushing his ear. "You have been claimed by the train. You cannot run from it, but you can choose how you stay."
The woman's words wrapped around him like chains. "Choose how you stay." He shook his head violently, his breath fogging the glass door. "No, no, there has to be a way out. There has to be." The watch's hands spun so quickly now that they blurred into a single circle of light. The ticking grew unbearable, like a hammer slamming against his skull. He wanted to throw it away, to smash it on the glass floor, but some unseen instinct told him the watch was the only thing keeping him tethered to whatever sliver of reality remained. The shadows stirred again. The woman's hand faltered, and the invisible restraints that bound them loosened. They began to advance once more, their faceless heads jerking in unnatural angles, their movements like broken marionettes. Panic surged through him. He banged his fists against the glass door. "Open!" And then, without warning, the door dissolved. It didn't swing open, didn't shatter. It simply ceased to exist. Where there had once been glass, there was now the forest he had seen in the reflection, its trees whispering in a language older than words. The air that seeped through was damp and thick, carrying the smell of moss and rot. The woman smiled again, tilting her head. "Step through if you dare." The shadows lunged at once. With no time to think, he stumbled forward, tumbling headfirst into the forest. His body hit wet earth, his lungs filling with the bitter smell of decay. Behind him, the glass door snapped shut, vanishing into the trees as though it had never existed. For a moment, there was silence. Then, faintly, the whistle of the train echoed through the woods. The narrator pushed himself to his feet. His hand shook, his knees weak. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, but the railway cut through it like a scar. Rusted, ancient tracks gleamed in the pale moonlight. The same train, the empty one he had glimpsed before, sat motionless on the tracks, its engine sighing smoke into the night air. He stared at it, his chest tight. No, not another one. A whisper floated from the trees, dozens of voices speaking at once, their tones overlapping like wind through broken reeds. Board it, board it, board it. He turned in a slow circle, searching the shadows between the trees. Shapes moved there, tall, elongated figures with limbs too thin, too long. Their bodies bent unnaturally as they crept closer, their faces lost in the dark. Fear surged, raw and primal. The watch in his pocket pulsed with warmth, ticking softly now, as though calming him. He looked back to the train. The door of the nearest carriage stood open, the interior faintly glowing with a sickly yellow light. He didn't want to step aboard. Every part of him screamed to run, but the figures in the forest grew closer, their whispering rising in pitch. He made his choice. Stumbling forward, he ran toward the train and climbed inside. The door slammed shut behind him. Inside, the carriage was nothing like the others he had seen before. This one was alive. The walls pulsed faintly, as though veins ran beneath the surface. The floor vibrated with a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Rows of seats stretched ahead, but each one was occupied by something wrong. The passengers weren't shadows this time. They were corpses. Men, women, even children, all seated upright, their flesh pale and sagging, eyes milky with death. Some still wore the clothes they likely died in, tattered coats, stained dresses, uniforms from eras long past. The stench of decay filled the air, thick and suffocating. He gagged, covering his mouth. The corpses turned their heads in unison to look at him. And then they smiled.
The stench clung to his throat like glue, choking him. He staggered down the aisle, trying not to meet the gaze of the corpses, but their milky eyes followed him all the same. Each head turned, creaking like rusted hinges. Their grins widened, teeth too long, too sharp. Some of the mouths hung open in silent laughter, while others whispered words he couldn't understand, broken syllables, ancient tongues that rattled inside his skull. "Why?" he whispered, clutching the watch to his chest. "Why am I here?" One of the corpses tilted forward, its bones cracking. It raised a finger and pointed at him. Its jaw moved with a grinding sound until the words formed. "Because you boarded." The others echoed the phrase, voices weaving together, some high-pitched like children, others deep and hollow. "Because you boarded. Because you boarded." The train lurched suddenly, throwing him against the wall. The windows rattled, and beyond them the forest blurred into streaks of black and silver as the train began to move faster, faster. He stumbled forward, desperate to reach the next carriage. His shoulder slammed into the door, but it didn't budge. Panic surged.
The corpses were rising now, their joints popping as they stood one by one. "Because you boarded." Their voices grew louder, filling every inch of the carriage. With trembling hands, he pulled out the pocket watch. The ticking had slowed again, heavy and deliberate. He flipped it open. The second hand was stuck, frozen between two ticks. "No, no, not now!" The corpses advanced, their grins stretching wider than skin allowed. One reached out, its fingers cold and leathery, brushing his arm. He screamed and slammed the watch against the door. A crack split the surface. Light spilled through, blinding and white. The door groaned and then burst open. He fell through it, crashing into the next carriage. And the silence that awaited him there was worse than the noise. This carriage was empty. No passengers, no seats, no windows. Just a long, endless corridor of darkness. The floor was made of the same glass-like surface he had seen before, but beneath it he didn't see shadows this time. He saw himself. 1,000 reflections stared back at him from beneath the glass, each one twisted, deformed. One had no eyes, another had a mouth stretching ear to ear. Another still was nothing but a skeleton draped in his clothes. He staggered back, but no matter where he moved, his reflections moved with him, except one. At the far end of the floor, one reflection did not mimic his movements. It just stood there, smiling. "Who are you?" he whispered. The reflection tilted its head. Then, in perfect silence, it lifted a hand and pointed down the corridor. The air grew colder. His breath came out in white puffs. He forced his legs to move, walking carefully across the glass floor, refusing to look down at the distorted versions of himself. But the whispering returned, this time not from shadows or corpses, but from the reflections themselves. "You shouldn't be here. You should have stayed seated. You belong to the rails now." He clutched the watch tighter, sweat dripping down his temple. Every step felt heavier, as though the air itself resisted him. When he reached the end of the corridor, the reflection vanished. The glass beneath him cracked. A thunderous voice echoed through the darkness, vibrating the carriage. "Time is running out." The floor shattered. A thunder rumbled, and everything he knew was once again shattered. He landed hard, but not on glass, not on wood, not even on earth. He was lying on tracks. Cold steel rails stretched beneath him, humming with energy. When he looked up, his heart stopped. The train, the very train he had just been inside, was bearing down on him, its headlights blazing like suns, its horn screaming into the night. He scrambled to his feet, lungs burning, but the train was impossibly fast, gaining on him with every passing second. The watch in his hand burned, its ticking now a furious drumbeat. His mind screamed at him to throw it away, but something deeper, something primal, told him it was the only key. He flipped it open again. The hand spun wildly, faster than thought, until they suddenly stopped. Both pointing straight down. Midnight. The world froze. The horn of the train cut off mid-blare. The ground stilled. His breath hung motionless in the air. And then everything shattered like glass. He was back in the station, empty, silent, waiting. The train stood before him, its doors open, inviting. He staggered backward, eyes wide, throat dry. No, no, I can't be still here. The woman stood by the door again, pale skin, black veil, lips curling to a soft smile. You chose to stay, she whispered. Behind her, the shadows gathered once more, their faceless heads tilting in unison. The whistle blew.
The station was not the same as when he first entered. The benches were warped, melted into the tiles like wax. The timetable board no longer displayed train schedules. Instead, it showed words flickering in and out, as if typed by unseen hands. You can't leave. You can't leave. You can't leave. Every bulb above him buzzed violently, casting shadows that swirled along the walls like living smoke. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he tried to focus, to find an exit. Not real, he whispered to himself. Not real, just a dream, just... A voice interrupted. Smooth, calm, and far too close. Dreams don't tick. He spun around. The pale woman was standing inches away. Her veil brushed against his arm, though he swore he hadn't felt her approach. In her hands, she cradled something that shimmered faintly. The watch. His watch. No, he croaked. He lifted his own hand, and the watch was still there, warm against his skin. But in her hand, another one ticked. Two identical watches, both beating in sync. She tilted her head, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. One of them is yours. The other belongs to him. Who? His voice cracked. The sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the station. Slow, heavy, deliberate. He turned, and his blood froze. It was himself. Not just a reflection this time. A perfect double, walking toward him, shoulders hunched, eyes burning faintly red in the dim light. The double's lips curled into a grin that was nothing like his own. The woman stepped aside, as if presenting the two of them to each other. The rails always require balance. Two passengers, one ride, one remains. The doppelgänger's voice cut the silence, deeper and crueler than his own. I've waited for this moment. The floor trembled. Far off in the tunnel, the horn of the train roared again. The real him stumbled back, clutching the watch tight. His double mirrored the movement, raising the other watch in his hand. Both ticked in unison, but with each tick, the station flickered, sometimes old and empty, sometimes rotten and broken, sometimes filled with corpses seated quietly on the benches. He felt the walls closing in, the air thickening. "What do you want from me?" he shouted. The double smiled wider, exposing too many teeth. "I want your seat." The whistle screamed again. The train was coming. The woman stepped closer to him, her cold hand brushing his shoulder. "When the doors open, only one of you boards. Choose wisely." The double lunged. They crashed onto the tiled floor, the sound of glass shattering beneath them, though there was no glass. His double's hands were ice cold, fingers digging into his throat. He gasped, thrashing, his vision blurring. The ticking of the watches filled the air, louder and louder, until it was deafening. With the last of his strength, he slammed his watch against the floor. A crack opened in reality itself, white light bleeding out, engulfing them both. For a moment, there was silence. Then, he was standing again, alone. The station was gone. He was back inside the train. The corpses sat quietly, their heads bowed. The double was nowhere to be seen. Only the woman stood in the aisle now, holding the watch. She smiled at him softly, almost tenderly. "You boarded. You chose." The train jolted forward, plunging into the dark tunnel ahead. And this time, there was no end.
The train plunged into a darkness so complete that even the faint glow of the carriage lights seemed to drown in it. He felt the metal wheels grinding against the tracks, each screech echoing like a scream that refused to fade. He sat frozen in his seat, his knuckles white from gripping the armrest. The corpses around him no longer looked still. Their heads were twitching, slowly, in unison, as though something unseen was pulling their strings. Then, one by one, their mouths opened. No sound. Just wide, gaping holes, frozen in a silent scream. He wanted to move, to run, but his legs refused. His eyes darted to the pale woman. She was gone. In her place stood something else. At first, it looked like smoke. A shadow shaped vaguely like a person. But the longer he stared, the more it took form. A tall figure with elongated limbs, its face a blur of shifting mouths. Each mouth whispered, hundreds of voices all at once, spilling out secrets he didn't want to hear. Your lies, your fears, your shame. The voices crawled inside his skull, scratching, prying. He clutched his head, screaming, "Stop! Please stop!" The corpses answered. Their mouths moved now, but still no sound came. Instead, he heard their words inside his head, the same way he heard the whispers. You are not the first. You will not be the last. We all boarded once. The tall shadow leaned closer, its whispers piercing his mind like needles. Do you know where this train goes? He shook his head violently, tears streaking his face. The thing smiled with mouths that weren't its own. It doesn't matter. You never leave. Suddenly, the carriage door at the far end slammed open. Cold wind rushed in, carrying the stench of rot. Beyond the door, instead of another carriage, there was nothing. Just a vast abyss, endless black, studded with faint blinking red lights like distant eyes. The shadow figure stepped aside, pointing to the door. "It is time." The corpses turned their heads toward him, their empty eyes glowing faintly now. All in unison, they raised their bony fingers and pointed toward the door. His watch burned hot against his wrist, ticking faster, almost screaming. "Jump," whispered the voices, "or be taken." He staggered up, his whole body trembling. The door gaped wide, the abyss waiting, those red eyes blinking hungrily. He could feel it pulling him forward, as though gravity itself belonged to the void. He turned back. The corpses watched. The shadows stood still, its countless mouths curling in something close to amusement. His hand shook as he clutched the watch. If he jumped, would he wake up? Or would he fall forever? The train rattled violently, the lights bursting one by one until only darkness remained. And with one last scream tearing from his throat, he leapt.
The air ripped past him as he fell, faster, deeper, with no end in sight. His scream tore through the void, but dissolved into nothing. Devoured by a darkness so complete it felt alive. His chest burned, lungs clawing for air, but the fall never slowed. The train was gone. The corpses, the shadow, the ticking watch, all of it erased, swallowed whole by an infinite abyss. At first, he clung to reason. Perhaps the tunnel had no bottom. Perhaps he was plummeting through some cavernous shaft carved beneath the world. His brain, desperate for logic, tried to invent distance, tried to measure the speed of his descent. But time itself betrayed him. Minutes, hours, he couldn't tell. The fall stretched longer than breath, longer than heartbeat, longer than thought. Then came the eyes. They appeared one by one, faint and dim, blinking open like embers stirring in dead ash. Red, endless red. At first, only a handful glared at him from the black, but soon there were dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions, lanterns burning in the void, unblinking and patient. They surrounded him on every side, above, below, and beyond, a sea of watchful hatred. None moved closer, none drifted away. They simply stared. He tried not to look back, but he felt them, felt the weight of their gaze. Each one drilled into his skull, stripping him bare until he was nothing but bone and terror. Then the whispers began. Faint at first, murmurs sliding through the black like smoke. His ears strained, desperate to cling to sound after hours of silence. But when the voices sharpened, his blood froze. They were familiar. His mother's voice, soft and broken, the way she used to hum when he was a child trying to sleep. His father's gruff laugh, hollow and wet, echoing with the cough that killed him. Friends, lovers, neighbors, people he had buried long ago, all of them speaking at once, weaving in and out of one another like threads of a tapestry unraveling in his head. But none of them spoke to him. Another one has jumped, a woman sighed. They always jump, a man replied. They always fall, another whispered, a chorus building behind him. He clawed at the air, nails scraping against nothing. His body twisted, jerking violently as though invisible hands tugged him in all directions. His stomach churned. He wanted to vomit, to scream, to beg, but the void swallowed every sound. And then, without warning, he stopped. Not gently, not with impact. One moment his body plummeted, the next he stood upright, his legs buckling beneath him, but the ground held. Cold, smooth, solid. For a long moment he couldn't breathe. His mind refused to believe. He patted the surface beneath him with trembling hands. Tile. He felt tile. Slowly he lifted his head. He stood on a platform. It was the station. The same cracked tiles beneath his knees, the same rusted benches lining the walls, the same broken clock looming overhead. Only everything was wrong, distorted, reversed. The lights above him glowed black instead of white, casting shadows that illuminated nothing. The signs swung upside down, letters carved backward like broken mirrors. The benches stretched longer than they should, endlessly repeating into corners that shouldn't exist. And the clock, God, the clock, did not tick forward. Its hands moved in reverse, one stuttering inch at a time. Tick, tick, rewind. At first, he thought he was alone. His breath rasped in the silence. But then from the corner of his eye, he saw them. Figures scattered across the platform, sitting on benches, leaning against walls, standing by the rails. He turned, and his stomach lurched. Every face was his own. Dozens of versions of himself stared back at him, some older, hair silvered, eyes hollow, others younger, fragile, trembling, some broken and bloodied, flesh dangling in strips, others clean, pristine, but expressionless, like mannequins molded in his shape. Every single one looked at him in unison, dozens of pairs of his own eyes boring into him, wet with despair. He staggered backward. No, this isn't real. This isn't real. One of the figures stepped forward, a version of him with sunken cheeks, lips split, eyes blackened with sleepless nights. It smiled, a cruel, exhausted smile that stretched too wide. You think you escaped, but you've only arrived where we all end up. The others began to murmur, lips moving together like a choir of corpses. Their whispers overlapped, rising until the platform pulsed with sound. We all boarded once. We all jumped. We all fell. We are all still falling. He dropped to his knees, palms pressed against his ears, screaming, "Stop! Stop! Shut up!" But the whispers drilled through bone, leaking into the marrow. His eyes blurred with tears, his heartbeat clattered against the ticking of the backward clock. The double reached for him. His hand was his hand, pale and shaking, but cold as ice. It seized his wrist, the one with the watch. The watch seared his flesh again, a burning brand that pulsed with unbearable heat. "Do you want to know the truth?" The double hissed, leaning close. Its breath reeked of ashes. "The train never moves. We do." The platform shuddered. The black lights above flickered like dying stars. The rails screamed as though metal tore itself apart. And then, through the choking smoke of the far tunnel, he saw it. The train.
The same ancient engine, the same lantern eyes glowing, only now their light poured backward into the dark, bleeding into cracks that swallowed themselves. The wheels screeched as they rolled in reverse, grinding against rust and bone. The doors slid open with a moan. Inside, the carriages pulsed with shadows, black veins crawling across the windows. Figures shifted within, pressed against the glass. He couldn't see their faces, but he knew them. Passengers, waiting, watching. Every version of himself turned toward the train as one. Their hollow eyes glistened, and their lips moved in unison. Bored, bored, bored. The chant built into thunder, shaking the tiles beneath his feet. His chest tightened, breath failed him. He stumbled backward, clutching his burning wrist. No, no, I won't, I can't. But the watch ticked louder, faster, each beat like a hammer smashing bone. Tick, tick, tick. He clutched his ears, but the sound was inside him, rattling his skull, bleeding into his heart. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. The train waited, and with every passing second, the chant grew louder. Bored, bored, bored. He fell to his knees, staring at the open doors. Inside, the shadows writhed. Something whispered from within, not in his voice, not in anyone's voice, but in all voices at once. Your seat is ready. The watch screamed against his wrist, and he realized the truth. There was no choice, only the ticking, only the train.
The train screamed as it carved through the endless night, a shrill metallic howl echoing against unseen walls of fog. By now I had lost all sense of time. Hours might have passed, or maybe days. The moon outside never shifted, hanging over the skeletal tree line like a predator's eye, unblinking, eternal. I pressed my forehead against the icy glass, hoping for some sign that this nightmare was unraveling. Instead, I saw him again. The conductor. He stood on the far side of the platform, between two cars, perfectly still. His cap was tilted low, obscuring most of his face, but I could see the glint of his teeth in the dark. They weren't teeth meant for smiling. They were long, jagged, predatory. I pulled back from the window just as the door to my carriage groaned open. "Ticket, please." His voice slithered through the silence, low and guttural, almost too inhuman to belong to a man. I froze. My hands were empty. I hadn't had a ticket since the beginning of this damned journey. "I told you, I don't have one," I stammered, forcing courage into my voice, though my insides writhed with fear. The conductor stepped inside, his boots clanging against the iron floor. The air shifted with him, growing colder, heavier, pressing down on my lungs. The lamps in the carriage flickered violently until one by one they died, leaving us in a suffocating gloom. The only light now came from his lantern, swaying in his hand, its flame impossibly black, yet somehow burning, casting shadows that twitched and writhed like living things. "What cost?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. The conductor tilted his head, and I saw his eyes, hollow sockets, burning with a pale fire that wasn't entirely from this world. "Your soul," he hissed. The carriage groaned, as if the train itself responded to his words.
I stumbled backward, bumping into a row of rotted seats. The upholstery tore under my grip, releasing a foul, moldy stench. The train was rotting from the inside out, alive but decaying. "You've boarded the shadow line," the conductor continued, his voice almost reverent. "There is no return, only payment, and payment is eternal." I shook my head. "No, why me? Why this train? I didn't choose this." The conductor chuckled. The sound was not human. It was like coal breaking apart in a furnace, sharp and ugly. "You've boarded the moment you chose to run from yourself. You boarded when you denied what waits in the silence of your own past. This train does not seek passengers. Passengers summon it." His words carved into me like knives. Summoned it? No, that wasn't possible. And yet a memory stirred. Foggy, jagged. Me standing at a crossroads one night. The distant cry of a whistle I thought I had imagined. The temptation to follow the sound because it promised escape. I had boarded willingly. No, that wasn't how it happened. But the memory wouldn't fade. The conductor stepped closer until his shadow fell over me entirely. I tried to look away, but his presence dragged me in like a whirlpool. "Every rider pays," he said, "and most never realize what they have agreed to until the rails have already closed around them." He raised a gloved hand and pressed it against my chest. Instantly, the world around me shuddered. My vision tunneled, and I was no longer in the carriage. I stood in the middle of a blackened wasteland. The sky was blood red, the ground cracked and smoldering with embers. All around me were figures, hundreds, maybe thousands, shuffling in endless lines, their faces blurred, their bodies faintly glowing like dying coals. Chains clinked at their feet, dragging them forward towards an endless track that vanished into the horizon. The conductor's voice thundered above the wind. "This is the terminus of all things. Every soul who boards finds their way here eventually. They feed the rails, they fuel the engine. Without them, the shadow line cannot run." I wanted to scream, to deny it, but the sight before me was undeniable. Souls, humans, like me, reduced to fuel for this monstrous machine. And then I saw something worse. One of the figures stumbled and turned its head towards me. I recognized the face instantly. It was mine. I gasped and fell backward. The vision snapped. I was back in the carriage, gasping for air as though I'd been drowning. The conductor stood above me, silent, watching. "What are you showing me?" I demanded. "The truth," he replied simply. "You think you are alive. You think you are still breathing. But you are not. You boarded this train the moment your heart stopped." "No, that's impossible." But memories began rushing back, fragments I had buried. The crash, the sound of twisting metal, screams, my own scream, then silence. I was dead. And this train wasn't carrying me to a destination. It was carrying me away from the truth. The conductor leaned closer until his skeletal grin filled my vision. "Your only choice now," he whispered,
is whether you accept your fate as fuel or resist until resistance itself consumes you. With that, he turned sharply, his lantern swaying violently, and strode toward the next carriage. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that shook me to my bones. I collapsed against the seat, trembling. My breath came in ragged bursts, but I didn't have the luxury of despair, because outside the window, the fog shifted, and I saw something new. Shapes in the mist, dozens of them. They clung to the sides of the train, clawing at the windows, their eyeless faces pressed against the glass. They weren't passengers. They weren't human. They were something worse. And they were getting inside.
The train screeched into the inverted station, wheels gnawing against the rails with a scream that wasn't made of metal, but of flesh. The air trembled, vibrating with every grind of its backward motion. The lantern eyes of the engine glared at him, not with light, but with hunger. The doors stood open, waiting. Every version of himself stood frozen, bodies twitching with anticipation, eyes hollow, throats whispering in unison. Bored, bored, bored. The sound wasn't only outside, it was inside his skull, pressing against the back of his eyes, rattling through the marrow of his bones. He stumbled backward, shaking his head violently, his burning wrist clutched to his chest. "I won't," his voice cracked, breaking under the chant. "I won't get on." But the train breathed. He could hear it, the long, rattling inhale of the engine, the low exhale of smoke that coiled through the tunnel like living snakes. Every second the watch ticked louder, hammering, demanding. Tick, tick, tick. The double, the version of himself with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes, stepped closer, lips curled into a mockery of comfort. "You've already boarded. You just don't remember." The words slammed into him. He staggered, nearly collapsing. His gaze flicked to the other selves. Some nodded slowly, others clutched invisible wounds, a few bared teeth in grotesque grins. "We all boarded. We all fell. We are all here." The watch seared his skin. The pain shot through his arm, up into his heart, into his head. His vision blurred, and for one terrifying second, the station around him flickered. The tiled floor cracked into raw flesh. The benches bent and warped into rows of ribs. The black lights above dripped with something wet. He blinked hard. The illusion vanished, but the echo of it remained. The doors of the train hissed, and the shadows inside writhed faster, pressed against the glass, clawing. Their shapes weren't his doubles this time. They were wrong. Longer arms, crooked necks, teeth like shards. Passengers, twisted by something far older than him. He turned to run, but the platform stretched. No matter how fast he moved, the benches multiplied. The tiles repeated, the signs warped. His feet pounded against stone, but he never reached the end. It was a trap, a loop. His doubles laughed softly, a chorus of broken mirrors. The one with hollow eyes appeared ahead of him, blocking the way. "There is no leaving, there is only boarding." The train's whistle shrieked, a cry that split his skull and ruptured the air. The windows of the inverted station shattered inward, spraying glass like rain. Every version of himself turned toward the sound, eyes glowing faint red now, mouths opening wide in unison. Bored, bored, bored. The chant became a roar. Bored, bored, bored. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his ears, screaming. The watch burned white hot, the skin around it blistering and tearing, but he couldn't rip it off. It was part of him now. He lifted his head. The train loomed above him, taller now, impossibly tall, stretching into the ceiling. Its lantern eyes flared brighter, and for the first time they blinked. Not lights, eyes, enormous, ancient eyes, watching. The shadows inside surged forward, arms, hands, claws stretching through the open doors. They reached for him, curling and writhing. And then he felt the tug. It wasn't physical at first. It was inside him, the chant, the ticking, the whispers of the dead. They weren't calling him, they were pulling him. His body began to rise against his will, dragged by invisible threads. No, no, stop! He thrashed, kicking, clawing at the tiles. His nail fingers tore off, blood smearing the ground. But it didn't matter. Inch by inch, he slid toward the train. The hollow-eyed double leaned close, whispering in his ear as he struggled. The truth isn't that we board the train. The truth is, the train boards us. And then the shadows seized him. Hands burst from the doorway, skeletal, wet, too many fingers. They gripped his arms, his legs, his throat. He screamed as he was lifted, body twisting violently. His doubles watched silently, their chanting breaking into a low hum, like a funeral dirge. The train's doors widened, gaping like a mouth. Rows of jagged teeth glistened inside. He fought with everything he had left. The burning watch on his wrist pulsed, and for a moment he thought he could use it, force it to stop, rewind, anything. But when he looked down, the watch had changed. It no longer showed numbers, only a single word. Bored. His scream echoed through the station as the shadows dragged him into the train's maw. The doors slammed shut with a wet crunch. The lantern eyes blinked once, twice, and the train began to move. But this time, it wasn't moving backward. It wasn't moving forward. It was moving deeper. The station trembled, tiles cracking, the walls splitting open to reveal endless black tunnels spiraling in every direction. The train howled as it dove into them, swallowing him whole. Behind it, the platform emptied. The doubles faded, one by one. The broken clock shattered, and silence returned. Only the tick of the watch remained. Tick, tick, tick.
If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Spookify Horror Stories for more terrifying tales. The darkness is just beginning.